The national debt is a constantly increasing total that is often cited as a bad sign for the U.S. economy. Despite this, it's been unclear how it actually affects everyday Americans. But with Moody's recent downgrade of the U.S. credit outlook, the real consequences are starting to become more apparent. When one of the world's largest credit agencies downgrades the United States, they're sending a huge warning not only to Americans, but the rest of the world. They're signaling a major lack of trust in the U.S., and in the world of finance, trust is everything. If you promise to grow someone's investment, you instead show up with a half-baked PowerPoint about long-term growth projections, you're not securing more funding, you're securing a day in court. And if a company is expected to hit a certain earnings per share and falls short, the stock price usually takes a hit. The market tends to overreact to negative indicators, and this downgrade is likely to spark even more fear and defensive behavior across the American economy. Today we're going to take a look at how the U.S. got here, what history can teach us about what happens when a country loses the world's financial trust, and how this plays into our future. To understand why the Moody's downgrade is so significant, we have to zoom out and take a look at the broader fiscal picture. The U.S. national debt hasn't just been growing, it's been accelerating. For decades, we've run deficits fueled by tax cuts, without matching spending cuts to costly wars, financial bailouts, and growing entitlement obligations. What was once a long-term concern has become an immediate policy challenge, with consequences that are now measurable in quarters, not decades. In just the last 4 years, the national debt has ballooned by over $11 trillion. That's more than double the entire GDP of Germany, layered right on top of what we already owed. As of this recording, the U.S. debt sits north of $36 trillion and continues to climb fast. Interest payments alone are now outpacing what we spend on defense. Yes, we are spending more just to service our existing debt than to fund the largest military on Earth. The same military that is known for excessive spending, but that's a topic for a different day. The takeaway here is that if you feel guilty about your mortgage or car payments, you can rest easy knowing that if the government managed your finances, it would be much worse for you. There's growing concern about how far the debt can spiral out of control in the future. The Congressional Budget Office, the government's own scorekeeper, projects that by 2035, publicly held debt will hit 118% of GDP, the highest in American history. Higher than it was during World War II, when we were fighting Germany and Japan at the same time. Today, we're hitting that number without a world war and unemployment below 5%. The Peter G. Peterson Foundation, which tracks long-term fiscal trends, warns that within a decade, interest on the debt could become the single largest line item in the federal budget, larger than Medicare and larger than Social Security. In other words, we are close to spending more on the cost of past choices than on preparing for the future, kind of like Sam and his legal fees. Wall Street is watching this too. JP Morgan warned that persistent fiscal deficits are likely to weaken confidence in U.S. financial leadership. Leaders are starting to wonder if the U.S. government is still a safe bet, and when trust erodes, borrowing becomes more expensive. Moody's was the last major credit agency still holding the line. S&P downgraded us in 2011 and Fitch followed in 2023. While $36 trillion may be a new high score, in the past other countries have also stretched their borrowing power too far, and they offer us a glimpse of what happens when trust collapses. Let's take a closer look at two countries that have already walked this path, and what their experience tells us about where we could be headed. Let's rewind to post-World War II Britain. The British Empire had just helped defeat Germany, but victory came at a massive price. By 1945, the UK's national debt had exploded to over 250% of its GDP. Britain had borrowed heavily, especially from the United States, through something called the Lend-Lease program. But when that program ended abruptly, the British economy was left exposed. Rationing continued for nearly a decade after the war. Even basics like meat and sugar were hard to come by. The UK had to take out a massive loan, again from the US, just to stay afloat. But what was most significant was that despite winning the war, Britain lost the financial trust of the world. The British pound, once the global reserve currency, was dethroned by the US dollar. It didn't happen overnight, it was gradual, but the message was clear. When you lose financial trust, you lose global power, even if you do own half of the world. Then there's Argentina, a country that in the early 20th century was one of the wealthiest per capita in the world. Fast forward to the late 1990s, and the country had racked up an unsustainable mountain of debt. The government kept borrowing and spending, hoping economic growth would catch up. It didn't. By 2001, Argentina's debt-to-GDP ratio was spiraling, and international creditors lost faith. The country defaulted on over $100 billion of debt, the largest sovereign default in history at that time. Banks froze withdrawals, and the peso, which had been pegged to the US dollar, collapsed. Overnight, middle-class families saw their savings wiped out. The streets erupted in protest, and 5 presidents cycled through office in just under 2 weeks. Inflation soared and poverty rates doubled. It all stemmed from one central issue: trust. Once the markets stop believing you'll pay your debts, they'll stop lending. And when that happens, the dominoes fall fast. The US still holds an incredibly privileged position in the global economy. We issue the world's reserve currency, we have deep financial pockets, and for now, the world still believes in our ability to pay our debts. Credit downgrades are a warning shot. They don't collapse economies by themselves, but they change how investors view risk. And when lending to the US feels riskier, 2 things tend to happen. Interest rates rise and confidence falls. That means higher borrowing costs for the government, which trickles down to higher interest on mortgages, credit cards, car loans, you name it. It also means a greater share of taxpayer money goes to debt interest, not schools, infrastructure, or defense. We're not in a crisis yet, but we are on a trajectory that, if left unchecked, has led other countries to disaster. The downgrade is a symptom. The illness is the constant refusal to align our promises with our paychecks. So what does this mean for you, for your family, for your future? Let's start with interest rates. When the US government is seen as a riskier borrower, lenders demand higher returns. That trickles down fast. Your mortgage, higher interest. That new car you were thinking about financing, more expensive. Credit card debt, if you're carrying a balance, you're already paying the price for Washington's budgeting problem. Cryptocurrency, actually no, that's fine. Keep loading up so it will reign supreme as a beacon of financial stability. Even if you're not borrowing, you're not off the hook. Businesses borrow money too, to expand, to hire, to innovate. When their borrowing costs go up, they pull back. That means fewer job openings, slower wage growth, and in some cases, layoffs. Then there's inflation. When a country is buried in debt, the temptation to inflate it away becomes real. And if trust erodes further, foreign investors may begin to offload US debt. That weakens the dollar, and a weaker dollar makes imported goods, everything from electronics to medicine, more expensive. Suddenly, everyday life becomes a lot more costly, and people start cutting corners not out of thrift, but out of necessity. And this Moody's downgrade might just be the beginning. If investor confidence erodes further, we could see a real shift, from considering US Treasury bonds as the safest asset in the world to something even the most conservative investors will hesitate to touch. But this trajectory isn't set in stone. The US still has the tools, the talent, and the time to fix this. What it doesn't have yet is the political will. So what would real solutions look like? There are 3 main areas. The first is spending reform. Not just cutting for the sake of cutting, but carefully examining where money goes, especially entitlements like Social Security and Medicare, which make up a huge portion of the budget. Modernizing these programs through gradual eligibility changes or means testing could help ensure their sustainability. The second is revenue improvements. Raising taxes is politically difficult, but it is an avenue that could be used to boost revenue. The third is pro-growth policies. Debt is less scary when the economy is expanding. That means investing in infrastructure, education, research, and immigration reform to boost productivity and widen the tax base. Some of the new administration's efforts already touch on these areas. Proposals to cut federal spending aim at reining in budget growth, while pushing energy production and reducing regulatory burdens are framed as ways to stimulate economic growth. If these succeed, faster growth could increase tax revenues and help shrink the debt relative to GDP. But so far, these efforts are just the beginning. Implementation and political consensus remain key challenges. Now, in particular, there is contention about the big, beautiful bill, with some analysts warning that it could add trillions to the deficit, while supporters argue it could actually save just as much over time. Either way, it is clear that the deficit is now more relevant than ever and will likely remain a topic of debate throughout the year. At the heart of all this, the debt, the downgrades, the economic ripple effects, lies one fragile and valuable thing: trust. Trust in our institutions, our leaders, and in our future. That's what credit ratings are really measuring. And right now, they're telling us that trust is wearing thin. The good news is, trust can be rebuilt. It takes transparency, tough choices, and leaders willing to spend less than they collect. So yeah, we might be doomed. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to see more of this type of content, and I'll see you next time.